Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for CompOps Day 2. As a heads up, we are pre-recording this. Unfortunately, we had some last-minute scheduling conflicts, and we wanted to make sure that we at least put together the discussion, which I'm very excited about today, on a topic that I think is very important for every organization in the world of sales comp. Creating a sales compensation center of excellence with 3 experts on this topic, and I can't wait to dive in. And so we wanted to pre-record it. But that being said, as you watch this, as you dive in, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask, and we will ensure that we can get back to you at a later date. So with that, I'd like to jump right in, and first and foremost, I'd like to thank everyone for joining, and then thank these key individuals that have joined us today to kind of present and share their experiences and thoughts. And so Stephen, and Elizabeth, maybe I'll just pass it around the room and get everyone to introduce themselves. And so maybe I'll start with you, Stephen.
Sure. So I'm Stephen Long, and I run the sales compensation function for Blue Yonder, who's a part of Panasonic. But previous to that, I spent a number of years working in companies like McKesson and Dun & Bradstreet, running sales comp as well.
Aya?
Hi, everyone. I'm Aya Kawashima. I am leading the Sales Comp CoE team at VMware, a global multi-cloud software company.
Elizabeth?
Hi, everyone. This is Elizabeth Walgram. I'm a Senior Director of Sales Compensation for Siemens DI Industries, and I've been doing sales compensation for over 15 years.
Well, it's absolutely great to have you all on. I think, as I mentioned earlier, this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. And I think maybe as a place to start, I'd love to, for the sake of the audience, just level set on the definition of a sales comp center of excellence. And so just kind of going back around the room, what does that mean to each of you and your organizations? So maybe Stephen, start off with you.
Yeah, I think of a sales comp center of excellence as a part of the organization that can ensure the proper governance, the proper harmonization where appropriate, proper oversight. And I guess one of the most important things too is creating equity in how we treat and how we pay people in similar roles in the organization.
Yeah, I would add to that we can see centers of excellence, or also sometimes I've seen those called centers of expertise, fall in different types of functional organizations. So they can be under the sales organization as it is at Siemens, but I've seen also them falling under HR or finance. So there's a lot of different ways of constructing it, and also how many types of areas of expertise they can take on. Is it just design and strategy? Sometimes they can be much larger with local day-to-day operations. So there's really a lot of constructs that those can take on. But what's key is, in my view, maturity of organization, and really how much of those types of activities you want to hand over to a group of experts, and what those group of experts are really good at.
Yeah, I would echo everything Stephen and Elizabeth already said. Just the essence of CoE to me is really, it is the essential function for the company to effectively design and execute a sales compensation plan to align the entire sales organization based on one single strategy to meet the company objective.
And so, I mean, this is an interesting point because I think there's a common theme across all, it's about bringing a single unified approach to how we think about executing on sales comp across the globe. And so maybe it's, recognizing there's nuances within geos or nuances within, specific business units, but it's applying the same fundamental frameworks and principles that we align on as an organization. I think, Elizabeth, you touched on something it's interesting that it can span anywhere from just pure framework governance to overall being a center of excellence that's actually doing the framework and the execution of comp, whether it's the day-to-day admin. I guess, just for level setting for the audience, I guess, how does that look like today in your organizations? And maybe just kind of starting with you, Elizabeth, and then working our way around.
Yeah, I think the design that you choose will really depend on how mature your organization is and how complex it is and whether it functions globally or whether it functions more locally. Obviously, the more complexity you have, the more you may need help from local teams, or on the flip side, you may need to have a really large team that composes the center of excellence itself. With my team, we are focused a lot more on thinking through strategy and design. So we would call what we sit in a headquarters. So it is very much focused on thinking about what types of sales incentive plans we should have, how they should be designed for different roles, and then what type of policies, procedures we should have in place. So for example, what we don't do is not necessarily going in and locally administering compensation for salespeople or doing any type of financial calculations. But as we mature and evolve, the types of activities that we do can certainly keep evolving, and we might get involved more with technology or role design and so on. So it's definitely not a static thing. You can have a lot of flexibility and pick up needs as you go.
I'd probably say, from my perspective, I've experienced a little different approach. So I was in a company where we did strictly the incentive part, creating the design the plans, and then we administer the pay. And then another company I was at, we had the whole end-to-end. So we owned job creation, job descriptions, job market pricing, creating the mix of the job, then designing the variable pay of the job, and then making sure to administer the salaries in the range, helping the sales leaders with offer letters, what we're going to offer a certain candidate, then administering the plans and paying the people. So I've had a little bit of experience in, I guess, both types, right? It's very focused. One has the entire end-to-end. And I think to Elizabeth's earlier point, it probably depends where the CoE is. So the first one I was in, it was in sales operations, which rolled up to the president of sales. So it was just strictly the design perspective of sales comp, sales incentives. The next place I was at was in HR. So the decision there was to bifurcate sales and non-sales jobs from a comp perspective. And really our thinking there was that a lot of times sales jobs are a lot more complicated than a non-sales job. And as an example, I use it all the time. If you're looking for an accountant or you want to create an accountant role, we pretty much know what accountants do. You don't need a really, different job description for this accountant. But if you have an inside sales job, a telecoverage job, a key account manager job, those job descriptions, market pricings are vastly different. So we found that having someone that understands the different sales jobs to kind of lead that job creation and market pricing and market matching was valuable.
I'm curious, how does that differ in your organization?
Yeah, my organization is very similar to Elizabeth's organization. And one example that Stephen touched base on. So my function reports into sales operations leaders and leading to sales leader. So therefore, intentionally, we are separating the design and governance function versus administration. So administration sits under sales finance organization. So my team owns the design and the governance specifically. And actual execution and plan rollout is done by our business partners across the geos, different BU sales group organization. So it's a collaboration across all the groups to execute the compensation plan.
Yeah. And I'm curious, Stephen, based on having kind of seen both sides, I think what are the biggest maybe pros and cons to having it all sit together versus, I know you touched a little bit on kind of understanding the roles and the piece, but maybe the non-obvious pros and cons of having it be very focused on governance of plan design and strategy versus also being responsible for the broader execution of it as well.
Yeah, I think some of the pros are that there's one source of information, one point of contact for the organization, anything compensation for sales related when you have it all together, right? Whether it's, I think the job is priced wrong. I think the salary range is too narrow. I think these people aren't paid enough in general. Can we kind of check that in the market? Two, this design is great or is not great, or my person's paid wrong because you have the admin as well. There's one place to go for the sales organization to come and say, I have a problem. I got to get my people paid and paid right. Now, on the flip side, I think where the cons may be is that if you're not prepared to resource a team like that properly, then your people that have the design responsibility, the governance responsibility, you kind of run out of time. You don't have enough resources to do all that work if you're not resourced appropriately. And, my experience, many times it's difficult to get appropriate resources for a non-revenue generating role in the company to resource appropriately. So a lot of times it's, to I's point, the admin part is going to be in finance somewhere. That's resourcing is their problem. Design is going to be in governance is in HR or sales ops. That way resourcing is their problem. You kind of divide and conquer. So that's where I kind of see the cons is you get pulled in too many directions and you kind of spread too thin, not to really be focused well in one particular area.
Yeah, Elizabeth, I know that you're kind of saying the design, having Center for Excellence on the design side, which I do think fundamentally that's where you can run into some of the biggest issues if you don't have a single framework or unified framework of how we think about designing plans or setting strategy in motion. But I'm curious, having not experienced, I guess, like what are there constraints that you're feeling in how that is there a disconnect? Is that something at all that's?
I think the disconnect would come if you would not have the leadership oversight over all the related type of areas. In my role, we're very lucky that we have really great leadership that has put in initiatives in sales that are well thought through and that work together and are very structured. So even though we don't handle in our team certain topics, for example, sales harmonization or thinking about roles or territory management, we work very closely together with those teams. And we even think of them nearly as a bundle of topics. So we have check-in calls, we do design sessions together and so on. So it works the way we have set it up very well. But if you are an organization where you either don't have that strong leadership or you don't have individuals that want to share and collaborate, that's where I think you might have some of those challenges that where there's too many disconnects and left hand is not talking to the right hand enough. So it really depends.
One consistent gap area I'm observing based on the structure we have is specifically in the job role mapping area. We designed a plan for specific sales role, and we control the sales compensation plan mapping based on what job role this individual is mapped. And this job role mapping is done and owned by HR. And when they hire the people, when they don't map the individual to the right job role, we could have a mismatch of the sales compensation plan assignment to this individual. So if we had the authority to manage the job role mapping, but because of the scaling problem, we wouldn't have been able to. So we do rely on HR to do this job role mapping accurately. But this is the area we consistently see that the gap or errors that can happen along the process.
I think that's a good example of what I was talking about before, where you have everything in the Sales Comp CoE. As in your example, I had, when I was at that company, if they wanted to create a job or create a role, they had to come to me. So I create the role. And while creating the role, then I'm already thinking about, do I have an existing plan this role can go on? Is it like another role that we have, or is it really a new role, or is it a same role with a new fancy name they want to put on it, right? And that way, if I see there isn't a match of a plan, I start creating a plan while we're creating the role, doing the offers, doing the sourcing for the job. So when we get to that point, we know we have the right plan. So there's one advantage I can see having it all together.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, this goes back to the premise of this, having that sales comp center of excellence is about pushing a unified framework and a decision-making criteria or path. And so I'm curious, you said something very powerful, Elizabeth, which is like, if you have leadership buy-in and oversight, then even if it's a disconnect, at least you can kind of, get the buy-in to move forward and make those decisions. And this is a big decision for any enterprise. I think any enterprise of the scale of the ones that we're discussing here is, there's growth that happens organically. There's also growth that happens through acquisition, mergers, et cetera, over the many years in the life cycle of these businesses to get to where they are. And I think what you typically see is that sales comp generally tends to be more fragmented. And there's, you have to take a concerted effort and make it a concerted decision to bring it together into a center of excellence. And so I'm curious, within your organizations, what was really the catalyst that drove that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting.
You, Elizabeth,
it's very interesting on Siemens DI side, because Siemens is a historically very old company. We're headquartered in Germany, so we're global, but we have a lot of the European influence. And the center of excellence that we have is actually quite young. It's those initiatives that we've been doing are really over the last 2 years, and we can talk a little bit later about some of the successes we've had, but we've moved that quite along very, very much in those 2 years. But to go to your original question, what really happened to get the Center of Excellence off the ground is that I think it really goes back to powerful leadership. We had a change of leadership, some new leaders that were put in place that wanted to change the way sales are run in the organization, do more of digitalization, be more modern, and so on. And they came with a lot of experience in how centers of excellence can be run and how other initiatives can be run as well. So having that very powerful experienced leadership come in and build the case for change, and we are just one of the piece of the change that is happening in our organization, has really been what led to the creation of it. They recognize that there's value in having a centralized team that is an expert in sales compensation and can help drive this from a central and global and consistent framework.
I'd say probably from my experience, 2 different experiences. One was probably we had multiple divisions. The one division had to have the most salespeople in it, had all the automation done, set up, had their cost of sale down to a very good level. And as the head of HR then at the time, and then the CEO and the CFO kind of looked at it, they said, we need to get the same kind of efficiencies in the other parts of the business, even though they're smaller sales number wise, but a lot of times their revenue is a lot higher. So that's when I decided why don't we take the team that's working well and ask them to kind of build out the COE for the rest of the business. And that's kind of what we did to build it out at one company. And another company, actually one I'm at now, Blue Yonder, and I've only been there about 1.5 years, but from what I understood prior to me getting there was a lot of the parts of the world, the regions did their own thing. And I think as the leaders looked at it, senior leaders looked at it, said, it gets out of hand. There's too many people doing their own thing, make their own decisions. We don't have good control costs of what we're spending on selling expense. We need to put it in one place, just get our arms around it and see if we're going to do something different because it makes sense, then fine, but let's do it because it makes sense, not because somebody doesn't agree with what they're doing in another part of the world. So I think that's kind of more of a get your arms around it at Blue Yonder, and our previous company is more around how do we get some of the same efficiencies, automation, end user experiences that we had at one division at the time.
I think, has your experience?
Yeah, Very similar. So in case of VMware, by the time I joined the company, the COE already existed. But what I heard is before COE function, there was vast misalignment among sales leadership team in terms of go-to-market strategy, priorities, and associated messaging to the field. And that led to an increasing number of sales compensation plans, on-top bonus programs, pulling the field sales team to many different directions. So that led to, I believe, the decision to have one single point to align all the basically strategy and objective around sales compensation plan.
I think another point too, Elizabeth brought this up a couple minutes ago, and I experienced this as well at a past company, is you typically have multiple divisions at a company. One was going to have the largest number of salespeople, right? Maybe the highest selling expense. So they may go out, for example, and hire somebody that has 15, 20 years of sales comp design experience. Whereas the other divisions have smaller sales teams, and we get somebody in finance come up with something, and they'll hire just admin people to do the pay. And I think what they find after a while is that the efficiencies they're getting over here, we need that expertise of someone that's built sales incentive plans, that understands the best practice, understands ahead of time what we may be walking into unknowingly if we don't know from past experience what could happen with a certain type of design. So that's another way it kind of forms itself when the business sees a certain part of the business that's performing very well from a sales comp perspective. How do we get that same expertise and experience to help the rest of the business out?
Yeah, 100%. I think that that statement is very, very valid, especially in the smaller geos, smaller business units where they actually tend to have some of the most complex, aspects of their business model, because you can have a single geo that's selling all the same products that are sold in the largest geos, and so you're actually trying to, you have smaller amount of resources on your sales team to execute on the same effective functions that a larger geo has, and so you start to get more complex dynamics in terms of multi-bag reps, multi-territory coverage, kind of unique roles, and they're actually taking on a little bit more complexity without, to your point, Stephen and Elizabeth, the experience of kind of running a large organization. The other thing I'll add is, and I'm curious to get your perspective on this, is the geos and different business units will roll out and adopt go-to-market motions at a different pace. And if we don't leverage the learnings of rolling out a model in one geo to the rollouts of other geos, it's kind of a missed opportunity, right? Kind of establishing the framework and then rolling it out as and you see this in product launches that happen in different geos based off regulation or whatever it is, where kind of there are constraints to how you do a product rollout. You tend to see this quite a bit, but I'm curious to get your perspective on that.
Well, in our case, when we were rolling out our global framework for our sales incentive plans, we rolled it out at the same time to all the lead countries that we have. Now, all of them are adapting the principles maybe at a slightly different pace. There's a lot of cultural differences, legislation that needs to be overcome, costs that need to be overcome. So it's natural that that pace may be a little bit different, but at the very least, rolling everything out at the same time, I think has been helpful, because you're sending the consistent message to everybody at the same time that this is the direction that we're going and this is what we're planning on doing.
Yeah, we also try to derive global consistency across all the geos. And what we typically see is after we set the primary compensation plan, later we will receive the request from the APJ leader of one product specialist group, for example. Because of ABC unique situation in the market, we want plan ABC, which doesn't exist in the primary plan design framework. When that happens, we always bring in the worldwide sales leader of that product specialist group to see if what this APJ sales leader wants to do, if that aligns with what he or she wants to do at the global level as a global strategy. We approve such plans only when there's an alignment. So without worldwide sales leaders' approval for that function, those geo flavors will never be approved. So that's how we are trying to accommodate geo flavors, but in a way that it always aligns with the worldwide global strategy.
Yep.
If that makes
100%.
sense.
And in that way, when that plan model or flavor gets rolled out, if it's ever relevant for other geos, now you have a baseline set of data on how well it's worked. There's analytics, there's benchmarks that you can apply to kind of the go forward. I think that is the I think one of the benefits. And I know there's I do want to get to kind of diving into the benefits that you've each seen, and at a high level, kind of the impacts that have been had because of a CoE. But stepping back, maybe the challenges that we see most organizations face in kind of establishing a center of excellence or operating center of excellence really come in three flavors, and I'd be curious to dive into each one of these. But not all three tend to apply to every single organization, depending on where they are from a maturity perspective in each of these domains. But challenge one being harmonizing data. Two is the change management aspect of, there's a lot of different stakeholders and a lot of different tools and processes, and how do you educate and make this radical shift? And then the third piece is getting the buy-in from leadership to be your support as you're executing on these big transformations and how you operate. And so I'm curious, from each of you, which of these challenges were the most relevant and the toughest to overcome for you and your organization, and maybe a little bit of a background on how you went about doing so. Maybe starting with you, Aya, and we can work our way around the room.
Yeah, sure. The sales leadership alignment across different geos, across different BU sales finance groups are always challenging. But we do have clear governance structure, and we are giving the authority to finalize the plan design to the highest governance body only, which is led by worldwide sales finance and head of sales finance, HR, and others. And we framed the governance framework in a way that everybody has to align with the decision that was made at the top of the governance board. So it is challenging to align all the sales leaders, but in the end, after hearing all the feedback, requests from different groups, everything is vetted at this governance board. And that's how we are maintaining the global consistency, applying the same principle and philosophy to the plan design across different groups.
Yeah, I would say from our perspective, the leadership was probably not one of our challenges. As we've said, we've been very lucky to have very strong leadership that's pretty well aligned and working very well together. I think for us, the bigger challenges came with the data and change management. So change management more in the form of all the cultural differences and pace of different regions, for example, uniqueness of European countries and how they approach sales compensation versus Asia versus North or South America. So we certainly have seen a lot of that. But with the data, one of the things is just the complexity of really understanding the current state. So to give you an example, we have about 40 different financial systems, so that there's just a lot of complexity in where the data flows. Additionally, we didn't have one place where all the information about plans is housed. So when we would get the question of how many plans do we have, how do they look like for each role and so on, we couldn't really answer that very clearly, depending on how a plan was counted, we might get a slightly different answer, and we would have to go individually to each country to gather that information. So one of the things that we've been noticing that has been very powerful, actually, both with the change management and with the data, is building local relationships. We've established a role that we call a SIP coordinator. So that's really our liaison or internal coordinator for each of the countries with which we'll work. And we will have regular contact and regular meetings with that individual to not only learn about what on the ground happens from a sales compensation perspective, but also we partner with these individuals to help disseminate information and do rollouts and so on. So it's a very symbiotic relationship that helps both of us work better together on sales compensation.
I do think, I mean, it's interesting. The point you said around, like, when you're rolling it out, there's all these cultural differences. There's all these, nuances and pre-existing. Not pre-existing, but there's history. There's history to why those decisions were made a certain way.
Absolutely.
And you have to overcome that. I think, it's definitely a common challenge that we see across the board. Even if you have buy-in from leadership, you still have to overcome that.
Yeah. Exactly. But even so, there's some differences that are just inherent to the landscape. So, for example, in Europe, you have a pretty big power of workers' councils, and you have to make changes knowing how to fit within that landscape of workers' councils. Or in other countries, you have certain legislation that prescribes what you can or cannot really do, or at least the flexibility of that. And here I'm thinking about how you change pay levels. There's laws about how you can't necessarily lower total compensation or base salary. So you have to get very creative if you want to change pay mix. So it's those types of things that are just going to be something that any organization that wants to make change to sales compensation from a global perspective is going to be encountering.
I'm curious, Stephen, I guess from your perspective, which challenges did you face or did you find the toughest to overcome?
Yeah, I would say probably it's the change management. Just in my experience where I had to build it out, each of the divisions of the business were vastly different in what they sold, the selling cycle, the type of reps. So we kind of kept them, the data didn't matter. They kind of stayed in their own divisions, right? And it was kind of separate. Where I came across the most in the change management was, as soon as you come in, the first thing that people that were doing the sales comp work before the COE was created, everybody's like, they don't want you to touch your stuff. They're afraid to tell you things. Is my job going away? I mean, just the normal things that a person would think. If I'm doing something and now this team's coming in to do the same work, what happens to me? Now, at the time, we had a lot of people in the divisions that were doing 2 or 3 jobs, and this was 30% of all their jobs was the sales comp. The point of this was to be able to redeploy that person full-time to something more valuable than duplicating efforts that my admin team is already doing, as an example. I think it's really building the relationship with the people that have been doing it before, the sales leaders in the business that have no idea who you are, and are going to come in and take over their plans. And it's really how you build that transition with them. And it's really the way I did it was, at the end of the day, I'm here to help with best practice, to help to get efficiencies in the business, to help you get better experience for your sales reps. At the end of the day, the president of that division owns veto rights. He or she has the last say. So it's not like I'm going to come in and tell everybody what they have to do. That's not the way it works. I'm here to help you create a better plan, a better environment, more cost effective, motivate your people better. But at the end of the day, the president has to agree. And we had governance teams within each division because we didn't have one that oversaw the entire business. It was a very large company. But if there was a point where the president and I just couldn't agree, because I thought this is a bad idea. There's going to be some bad things that happen, whether it's, equity pay or whatever it may be. Then we take it to, in my case, the CHRO would be the one that would help arbitrate whatever the debate was. But we kept it all in that division. And that's kind of where I think we got the change management going, was that it's all going to stay. I'm not here to take it all over. I'm here to help you get better.
Yeah, there is definitely an element of like, you want to take everyone on a journey and almost, it's a little bit more of show than tell. And I think there's an element like of where we've seen it done best is almost kind of providing an initial like kind of analysis or readout to the sales leadership, just get a sense of like how potentially often or inequitable the plans are. And we've seen this where sometimes just showing a breakdown of equity fairness or quota equity, quota fairness, and the comp design like the metrics that we're actually tracking at a more granular level in a way that they've never seen it before, which again, kind of the best practices, the frameworks that we're bringing into how we think about measuring, just opens their eyes and really kind of gets their buy-in. I'm curious, like, was there an aha moment that any of you saw in that change management as you were going through?
We're still probably in the process of getting to that aha moment. But I would say one of the things you mentioned, data and analytics, that is actually also something that we're working on as hopefully in the coming fiscal year, we're going to be able to provide that as one of big services of the CoE to local countries and verticals. So that way they could actually take a look at how well they set targets and provide them with different insights. So we're definitely going towards that direction. And let's see how many aha moments we have coming out of those services going forward as well.
Yeah.
And I had a couple that I experienced. One was from the actual sales leaders, work with them on plans. The first aha moment for them of why this is a benefit to them was they'd say, we need to drive, our strategy for growth is this, we need to drive this thing, whatever this product or whatever it is they want to do. All right, so ask 5, 6, 10 questions and then come back with, well, here are 4 or 5 different ways we can design this. And their aha was like, oh my God, really? Look at all these different choices we have of how we can design this plan to drive we want to drive. And I think the aha for them was, having somebody in here that's been doing this a long time can give us better ideas and better choices. I didn't say, here's the one thing you need to do. I said, here are 4 or 5 different ways we can do it. Let's talk through them and see which one you think works best for your team. So I think that's one for them. Another one I experienced for the business in general was when I first started with a particular company, I went through all their plans and analytics on the plans. And I found a couple plans that had a lot of, I call it weak financial metrics, if you will, in the plans that they were paying on. And when you look at some of the data and some of the charting and graphing I did on it, it was showing that in this particular job, there are 100 people in this job, and 70% of the money they make is on things that don't produce a financial outcome for the business. And they're like, oh my God, we're spending that much money, we're getting what out of it? I said, exactly. So people are getting paid and we're getting no actually book sales for that pay we're doing. So, some of that activity is needed, but I don't know at 70% of their plan value, maybe 25, that's some of the ahas you get when somebody that has worked on plans and knows where the potential weak points are and kind of do some of those analytics and then go back to the business and say, here's where I see opportunities to either drive better behavior, get efficiencies on expense, or even efficiencies on the process for a better end user experience.
100%. Any
I don't know if it's a aha moment for change management. But so before CoE function, I heard that all the plan rollout was done by geo separately. And all those communication material was created by geo separately. So there was no single consistent content that was communicated to the sales team. Now, after CoE, we have one single content that will be rolled out to all the geos, all the groups, one single message to the sales team. I think that has made a really big difference to align the entire sales organization based on one single goal.
Yeah. I think this is, again, it's the concept of, do you want to just have every division and every group redo all the work in these silos versus kind of like the economies of scale that is the large enterprises? And it's such an immediate benefit that you see with having a COE for sales comp. And I think the one thing I do want to ask this question, because I think so far it's very consistent with what we see, but so far from all the answers, it's very clear that we want to go in not being extremely prescriptive, but rather giving a framework and enabling the business to make the best decision for them within the best practices that we've aligned on. But I'm curious, are there some things that are hard and fast rules for you within your center of excellence where you are very prescriptive and you demand a specific way of executing on things across the organization? And maybe it would be helpful to kind of share to the audience to kind of set up, or again, to get that context of what those are.
We do have a couple of key principles that everybody has to align. For example, the maximum number of metrics have to be 3, and you cannot go beyond 3 metrics. And in terms of metric weight, the minimum metric weight is 20%. You cannot go below 20%. And when you define the metric weight, it has to be in the increments of 10% point. We have that kind of very strict guardrail that everybody has to align. And of course, all the compensation mechanics, pay curves, and everything else, that can be designed only by the governance board at the highest level. That's not something each geo or different sales group can manipulate. So that authority is just centralized in one governance body.
Yeah, it's very consistent with what we have. In fact, we actually have the same principles. So maximum 3 metrics, prescribed payout curves, prescribed weightings, at least, the 20% weighting. We are also very prescriptive on the main financial measure, one financial measure that everybody has to be measured on. So what I would always consider those good principles of sales compensation design, we've implemented those, and they are part of our global sales incentive plan framework that all the plans for all the roles are based on. And one other thing that we're also very prescriptive on is eligibility for sales roles. So we have defined sales job families, and within them certain codes that people have to be coded in our systems in order to be eligible for sales compensation. So all of that is also something that you shouldn't be deviating from.
I would agree with what they have both said, and we have the same or very similar principles. I call them guiding principles for our plan design. The only thing that I put in there, and I'm probably successful 90% of the time, and again, it's because I own the administration part as well, is that the metric has to be automatable. Like, don't give me metrics that we have to manually track something, find it, because all I do is debate with reps and managers about that metric as opposed to the source system. The source of truth says this. So if you have a problem with it, go talk to the person who owns the source of truth. But the data is correct based on what's in that system. So that's probably one of my big ones too, is it has to be, data that can be automated, right? And there's going to be, I'll give in, I start there and I'll give in on a couple places, but it's always, you find somebody that can provide me the data, then I'll manually load it in and pay them, but I'm not going to track it for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically fundamental principles. Again, like once you've lived and breathed in the world of sales comp long enough and you've gained that experience and seen the pitfalls of doing it one way or another, if you can't track it, it's might as well just be an arbitrary or a base salary. And I think that's kind of a perfect example. Same thing with the weightings and the number of measures. So I mean, from what I'm hearing from you, and it sounds like it's, again, quite consistent. It's the fundamental principles, the core principles that we know. We have a lot of data that tells us not doing that, following those will have some significant pitfalls to the organization. We're very strict on, but otherwise we're trying to collaborate and create a framework to work with each of the divisions, each of the sales leaders to enable. And I think, I'm curious, and we're coming up on time here, so just stepping back, I'm curious if there is a feedback mechanism or a feedback process that you you currently do or take on to kind of help you collect the information back to kind of evolving the Center of Excellence over time, given the number of stakeholders and the breadth and the size of the organizations you're each supporting?
I would say we probably work through the SIP coordinators, so they can sometimes give us ideas about types of things that would be helpful for them, but it's also a feedback mechanism that they allow us to learn what the countries are thinking about some of the principles and things that are being rolled out by headquarters. So it's a dialogue and in both ways. And they can also talk about challenges for implementation that then we can consider in our design. So that back and forth through the SIP coordinators is what has been pretty powerful for us.
Yes, same mechanism at VMware. So in my team, we have the role called design leads. And they are facing different sales organizations. And their role is to, of course, communicate the decision made at the governance body back to those sales organizations and ensure that any compensation plan that they want to have is in alignment with the principles set at the governance body. But at the same time, they also receive feedback from APJ, AMER, and maybe LATAM, very different situation. And we do have a mechanism to bring that feedback back to the governance body to revisit the plan design as needed. So we are using this role facing different, what we call client groups, to make sure that the both-way communication exists.
And typically I've had the admin under me, so the SIP coordinators, or whatever you call them, Elizabeth, they were my team, so I couldn't really use them, but they're on the team, so they hear things. But typically what I do is I would just talk to managers in each of the areas. I schedule one-on-ones and talk to them, what's going on, what are you hearing, how's it working? We've done actually in the past, we've done actually surveys with the entire sales force on their comp plans. You know, did they understand what they like about it, what don't they like about it? We did all that. So I try to get feedback any way I can to try to improve it. But a lot of times it's talking to the leaders. They're going to hear it from the rolling up to the reps. That's usually where I get the best feedback, and really work with them. What's the best solution? You know, because not everything. Some of it's just input. Sometimes, right? It's good to know, but I'm not going to change it. But other times it is good feedback that, you know, how would you suggest we improve it or implement something different?
Yeah, quotas are too high. I think
they're always too common, high. Said every sales rep ever.
Yeah, exactly. So I know that we're close to wrapping up here on time, and so maybe just putting it back up to the group here. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you think is worth sharing? Kind of a final note on centers of excellence in sales comp.
The one thing I will say is when it comes to center of excellence, always keep in mind, even though you're trying to consolidate, harmonize the design, administration, whatever it is of your sales compensation incentives, always remember that if you have multiple business units, multiple divisions, multiple different sales teams, remember there's a reason why they're different, right? They contribute differently to the strategy of the business. So don't go in thinking now I have to make everything the same from a plan design perspective, or everything has to be the same from a data perspective, or, you get my point. It said they're different for a reason. So remember that going in, that I'm taking the same approach, but doesn't mean the same results could happen because they are different teams for a very good reason.
Yeah, I would say one lesson that is very powerful is to always remember about the amount of communication. So you just cannot over communicate. Communicate. And I think that's one of the things that we've started doing a lot more as a CoE is having more conversations with different stakeholders. And that, I think, has helped us be a much better partner and learn a lot more about what is going on the ground and how we can be helpful and what we can be changing. So unless you really develop those channels of communications with both lower level and higher level of individuals, I think this CoE is just going to be an artificial body. So you really have to be thinking as you create that group and operate that group, how can they be plugged in with as many individuals and as frequently as possible to get the real impact?
The only thing I would add is to really clearly design the governance framework and structure and build a process and tools around it. If we are really clear about the scope of authority each different group has, we can drive the right set of conversation and we can establish a right operating model across different groups.
No, I feel like it's a very common theme across all, again, different organizations, yet, the common element here is large enterprises where the same type of work can either be replicated in all these different silos, or we can find efficiencies of scale and kind of execute and scale. So I think it's not easy because larger organizations that require this tend to be harder to steer, which means it requires a lot of communication, to your point, Elizabeth. And I think, I and Stephen, I think the points that you're bringing up around how we think about building the frameworks and getting it done is a very critical part of getting this right. But it's clear that the benefits of doing so are there. I mean, all it takes is to look at one bad comp plan in one small geo to see, okay, we can potentially address that and avoid those kind of common pitfalls. But I really want to thank you again for joining and sharing your feedback. And I think this is something that we're seeing become more and more common, this consolidation of sales comp within a center of excellence. And as more organizations do this, I think we'll start to see some of these benefits be experienced in a broader base. But I do want to put to the audience, if there are questions, please don't hesitate to post them, and we will get back to you. I think again, can't thank Stephen, Elizabeth, and Naya enough for joining and sharing their feedback with everyone here today. So thank you all.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.